Welcome everybody to TechCraft, this is Rob, and in today's video we'll be going back to basics with part 3 of my beginner's guide to iOS shortcuts, where we'll be talking about the very important topic of data types. Let's go. So if you haven't seen parts 1 and 2 of this series yet, make sure you check those out. Coming up in part 4, we'll be talking about scripting. In part 5, we'll get onto the topic of how you can share your shortcuts and how you can find shortcuts that others have shared. And in part 6, I'll run you through some tips and tricks that I've developed over 20 years as a professional software developer. For today though, we're going to focus on data types, and let's start by making sure we understand what a data type really is. So in part 2, we saw this shortcut, the say something shortcut, which would set a variable here called the message to whatever was returned from this action. And we know that the variable has a name and that it has a value, but the variable also has a data type. The value that is inside that variable has a data type associated with it. It's the data type, whether the variable is an image or some text or a number or a calendar entry. It's the data type that tells shortcuts what to do with that data and also tells you what actions you can do with that data, with that variable. You might wonder why this concept of a data type is even needed. Why can't the iOS Shortcuts app just know what the data is supposed to be and do the right thing? To understand that, we should dive just a little bit deeper into the theory of data types, the theory of how computers store data. If you want to skip this theory, I'll put the timestamp below and you can skip ahead. Otherwise, let's dive in. So here on the screen, you can see that I've got 3 bytes, each byte having 8 bits, and the bit being the 1 or the 0. And this is 3 bytes of data, all represented as binary. And ultimately, all the data in your computer, iPad, iPhone, is going to be binary data. Now, this data can be interpreted in a host of different ways. One possibility is that we treat each byte as a number, in which case we have 3 numbers, 82, 77, and 66. And if we treat our data as numbers, then we can do number-related things to it, like we can add them together, we can subtract them, we can double them. You get the picture. But that isn't the only interpretation. We could treat each byte as a character in text. And if we do that, then the full 3 bytes gives us the character string ROB, all in uppercase. Each byte, each 8 bits, is 1 character. And if the data is text, then we can do text-related things to it. We can reverse the order of the characters, we can uppercase them, lowercase them, we can split them in the middle, and we can do all kinds of text-related things to this data. We could even choose to interpret this data as a color. The first byte could be how much red there is in the color, the second byte how much green there is, and the third byte how much blue there is. And if we add that together, we end up getting this color here. The Shortcuts app has a large selection of built-in types, and we can't possibly cover them all in this video. What we will do, though, is cover what I think are the most commonly used types and the most commonly used things you can do with those types, and we'll start by looking at text, numbers, and dates. So let's start with 3 of the most basic data types: numbers, text, and dates. I have 3 actions here that, in order, create a number, create some text, and create a date. This is a common pattern you'll see in shortcuts. You'll see actions that are named for the data type that they create. So this number was created by the number action. The text was created by the text action. You get the picture. In programming terms, you may hear these things referred to as constructors or as factories, but it's enough to know that there are actions to create values for certain types from nothing. Now, not all types have these actions, and we'll see an example of that very shortly. So it's quite rare that you'll create values out of thin air like this. More often than not, you're being passed a value as the result of some action. But there are occasions when you need to create some value from nothing, in particular when you're dealing with things like dates and numbers. If we go back to the say something shortcut from part 1, you will see that we have an action called ask, and the return value of this, the thing that it returns, is of type text, and we can check that by using the get type action. So if I bring this get type in here, I'm just going to delete all this other stuff for now, and we're just going to do get type of provided input. And if I press play and type something in, set text 7, then we will get type text. If I run this again and actually just type in a number, maybe have a quick guess before I do it, what will I get as the type? well, I actually get type text because this is defined to return a text. What we got there wasn't the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It was the character 1, the character 2, the character 3, and so on and so forth. Sometimes you have to be pretty careful with these particular issues around data type, but more often than not, shortcuts will actually perform the conversion for you, and we'll see an example of that shortly. So that's all well and good, but what can I actually do with these values? Well, you can find options for number types in the scripting section here. If I scroll down, there are actions that will operate on numbers, so calculate statistics, and so forth. If I go back and click in the documents section, you can see further down some actions that operate on and return text. So you can do things like change the case. And I can't find a section that lists the date actions, but if I search for date, then you will see that I can do things like adjust the date and get the time between dates. What I recommend is spending some time browsing through the list of actions, figuring out what types they take, figuring out what types they return, and just kind of getting an understanding about how these things piece together. To really master shortcuts, you really need to have a deep understanding of what actions are available and what types they take. I obviously can't go through every example of every data type here and every operation, but let me just show you two that I think are quite interesting and will give you an appreciation for how these things tie together. So I'm going to come back to the first shortcut that we made, which was this notify shortcut. I'm just going to press play and show you what this does. So I'm going to type in test here. And it sends a notification called test with a picture attached to it. What I want to do is make this text uppercase before I send the message. So I'm going to scroll back up here, and in between asking for the value and setting it in the variable, I want to drag in the change case action that we saw before. So I'm going to bring that in here, and it's linked that together, but be wary, the variable hasn't updated. So long press on that, clear, press and select magic variable, and I want to choose this updated text here. And I'm going to change the provided input to uppercase, and I can click on this and choose other things, title case, sentence case, messing around, but we'll leave uppercase for now. And we'll run this shortcut again, and we'll do hello world. When the notification comes through, you'll notice that we've got it all capitalized. That's very, very handy. So I want to show you one other interesting thing that I've already alluded to with regards to these data types, and that is how type conversion works. So I'm going to create a new shortcut down here. What I'm going to do is add in a number. We'll just call that 12, and then bring in a calculate action. And it's already picked up the number as the first operand, and I'm going to leave addition as the operator, and I'm just going to add that to 13, and obviously the answer should be 25. Let's see what happens. So there we go, we got 25. So what happens if we change this input number to a piece of text? Let's see what happens. I'm going to close that. I'm going to bring in a text object, drag that to the top. I'm going to type in Rob here and clear this out. Make sure we set that to the right input. So we're going to try and add these two things together. And if I run this now, I get 12. It's treating the text as a 0. Now, there's a strange bug here. If I'd actually typed in a number here first of all and attempted to run this, it would have worked fine. It would have turned the text into a number and the addition would have been fine. It seems to be very finicky about the order you do these things in. I don't like that. I don't find that reliable at all. So let's see what the better way is to do this conversion. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to use an action called get numbers from input. That's this action here. And what I want to show you is if you hover over the I here and click on it, you'll see it tells you a little bit about the action, but it also tells you what kinds of input types you can take and what things you should expect in return. So I'm going to drag this in the middle here, get numbers from text. Okay, cool. Click on that, select magic variable and choose numbers. And now let's run this and see what happens. So I run that and we got 12, and that's because the get numbers from text is treating this as a 0. I'm going to delete this and type in 1, 2, 3 and then run again. And we still get 12. And the reason for that is kind of frustrating. I didn't click out of this text box, so the value internally has not updated. The user interface shows 1, 2, 3, but the value is still Rob inside there. So if I just click out here and run again, you'll see 1, 3, 5. And I had to actually click a few times there to get that to work. It's kind of a little frustration and a little nit, but at least you know that that is there and you can be a bit more precise about your conversions. So the numbers, text, and the dates are all very interesting, but there's not a lot you can do with them. They're not particularly useful on their own. Let's dive into a few more types that I find to be a lot more useful for building real-world shortcuts. And we'll start with one that I think is particularly useful, and that is the URL type. So URL stands for Uniform Resource Locator, which is a very fancy name for a web address. If you've ever seen the address up in your browser, you'll know that it has like HTTP at the beginning and then www somewhere in there. That web address is basically a URL. Once you have a URL, you can either use it to open up a web page in Safari or to get contents from the web directly using this, the Get Contents of URL action, which is a bit more advanced. We won't look at that today. I have some other videos on that, which I'll link above. But for right now, we're going to mess around with some stuff in Safari. And what I want to do is create a shortcut that will prompt me for a search term and then execute a search in the DuckDuckGo search engine. So we know how to ask for some input. We've seen that already. We're going to use the ask for input action. I'll bring that in here. And we're just going to say, what do you want to search for? Okay. And we want this to be a text. We could actually search for more sophisticated things and we get a more sophisticated user interface, but we want to search for some text to notice all the different types we can ask for. And I'm just going to put in Siri in here as my thing I want to search for by default. The next thing I want to do is construct a URL, and I'm going to use the URL constructor action for that. So this is another one of those actions that can create a value of a particular type. And I'll just type in here https://. This has to be a fully formed URL, www.duckduckgo.com. I know that to do a search, I have to have a parameter called Q, and that has to be equal to the thing I'm searching for, which is this provided input here. And I can actually run this now and see what that URL looks like. So I'm going to search for Siri Shortcuts. Okay, and there is the URL it's constructed. Now what I want to show you is that the space I added in between Siri and Shortcuts has been replaced by this %20. This is an encoding that you need to have in your URLs, and that's one of the benefits of using this construction action to construct a URL is that you actually get something that is truly a valid URL and isn't just a bit of text that looks like a URL. Now we have our URL, we can open it up in Safari, so I'm going to use the open URLs action, which is open in Safari, and it will just take that URL directly. So now we can run this. Let's search again for Siri Shortcuts, and there we go. We're in Safari and we have DuckDuckGo open. I quite like these quick shortcuts. It's not setting the world on fire, but it's a very useful thing, and it actually does encourage me to use DuckDuckGo more than Google, which I find to be quite nice. So I find URLs to be particularly useful when building real-world shortcuts, and the two other types I use a lot are the location type and the image type. Let's see those now. So I've got a blank shortcut here, and one of the first things we can do is create a location using the location constructor. Notice also you can filter existing locations, you can get your current location, but I'm just going to get a location here, and I want to find Buckingham Palace, so let's search for that. There we go, and now I have Buckingham Palace as my location. If I run this, you'll see that I have the full address of Buckingham Palace, which is quite nice. So this is a rich object. Images don't have a constructor like this. There's no way to just kind of like pick an image out of thin air. So what you'll often find yourself doing is using one of the find photos action or the select photos action. Now select photos we're going to start with. This is one that will actually prompt us to pick some photos at the start. And if I just show you how that works, we'll press play and I can then choose a photograph from here. And that is the image that we bring into our shortcut. So to see how images and locations can work together, I want to build a really quick shortcut that will allow you to pick an image, find its location, and then show you that location on a map. So we'll start here. We've got select photos already, which gives us a photo. And then the next thing I want to do is use the get details of images action to pull a property of that photo out and make it available to us. And this is a very interesting part of our discussion around data types. Certain data types have certain properties associated with them. So an image, for example, has a width and a height, it has a location, it has an orientation, it's a whole bunch of interesting properties that are obviously different from the properties that a location has, which might have city and country and state, which again is different than the properties you might find in something like text, which might have length, might have whether it's a left to right or right to left, who knows. But each data type governs what the properties are for that data value. So with that in mind, what we'll do is we're going to pick the location property from this photo. And if I just run that, pick my image again, you'll see that I have an address here for Bourne Park, which is not too far from my house. So now what I want to do is show this on the map, but I don't want to show the actual location. I only really want to show the city. So I'm going to do get details of location. And one of the things I have to say about shortcuts that I find to be fantastic is the consistency of naming. When you want an action that will get some property or some detail of some type, that action is almost always called get details of the type. And the same is true when you want to find things, that are always actions with find. If you want to have a user interface to select things, they're called select. It's very, very consistent. And over time, you'll build an appreciation for that. And it's kind of like muscle memory. So now we have the location. I want to get the detail, and that detail is going to be the city. And let's run that and just check that that's working. Go into my photos, choose the portrait. And now we have Ipswich, which is exactly what I want. And then finally, show in maps. And show typically means that it's going to display something. And I'm going to drag that over, and it will automatically pick up that location's town, city. And we can press play. So dig out my image and see what happens. There we go. We have a map for Ipswich with my location on it. This is fantastic. So back in shortcuts, we can actually refine this a little bit. We did too many steps. Now, let me just say, there's no right or wrong way. What I'm about to show you is maybe a refinement, but some people could also say it makes the shortcut a little bit less clear. But I don't actually have to keep doing this get details of. I can directly peek into a property if I want within this slot here. So let me show you what I mean by that. I'm going to clear that, and I'm going to remove this get town city. And I'm immediately going to pick the city in this slot. So step one, select magic variable and wire this back up to that location. But I want the city, so I'm going to click on it, and notice now I can see all the properties of this object, of this data value here, based on its type. I can even try, if I want, to coerce this into a different type, but I wouldn't recommend that here. And we'll scroll down and we'll choose town and city, because that's what we want. Click done. And we've eliminated one action. And if I press play, we'll get the exact same result as before. Brilliant. Now, the only downside here is I can't find a way to stack this up, so I can't say, please get me the town city of the location of the photo all in this one slot. So I did have to do this. Maybe over time that'll be something that happens. That would be quite nice. So there is actually one more tweak we can make to this. We don't even need this intermediate action. I can actually pass the photo directly into the map, and it will do an implicit conversion into the location. This is really smart. Basically, because the photo has a location property, the internal system knows that it can basically turn that photo into a location. So I can delete this and select magic variable, choose photo, and now if I hit play, I will bring up, but this is going to bring up the exact location this time. It won't bring up the location for the city. So I'm going to choose a slightly different image so it doesn't show my home address. I'll choose this one. And this is the address in the Seychelles where I went on holiday recently. But notice just how much shorter that is. Now, I do recommend trying to do these things more step by step as you're learning, because there will always be edge cases where this automatic conversion doesn't work. And if you know the under the hood workings, then you'll be very well off. If you don't, you'll get stuck at that point and you won't be able to proceed. So definitely try early on to spend some time doing it very much step by step. So with text, images, locations, dates, numbers, URLs, you can build some really interesting shortcuts. There are two other data types that I really want to highlight though, because I think they're very important. You'll see them a lot as results from actions that you execute, and you'll see them a lot when you start to do things with user input and scripting like we'll do in part 4. These data types are the list and the dictionary data types. So these two data types are quite special in that they actually act as containers, holders for data of other types. So you can have a list of images, you can have a list of locations, you can even have a list that has one image and one location in it. So we'll start by looking at lists because I think those are the simplest. I have a shortcut here that I've started that has 2 location objects in it, and I want to put them in a list. So I'm going to pull in the list constructor. Again, this is a type that has a constructor, and there's a nice user interface for this. I'm just going to delete these 2 default options and choose add new item. And I'm going to use the magic variables to make sure that I pick Buckingham Palace first. Click done for that. Click plus. Magic variables again, and pick St. Paul's Cathedral this time. And notice here I can pick one of the properties from the location if I want, but it's actually storing the whole value in the list, which is very nice. So there's a list with 2 locations in it, and if I click play, what you'll see is Buckingham Palace is the first one and St. Paul's is the second one. And I actually have this nice swipe user interface directly in Shortcuts for navigating the items in the list. And the dots down here give you a sense of how many items there are. So one of the things I really like about Shortcuts is how smart it is at handling these lists. So if I bring in our show in maps action again, and this time pass in this list of locations, when I press play, it's going to give me a nice little user interface to pick which item in the list that I want. This is really nice, so I can choose, say, St. Paul's Cathedral, and there we go, we can now see St. Paul's. This is really powerful. You don't have to construct your own user interface for basic things like that. It's done automatically for you by the Shortcuts system. Dictionaries are very similar to lists in that they contain other items, but each item has a key associated with it, and then you can use that key to access a particular item. Let's see how that works. I'm going to delete this, and we, of course, have a dictionary constructor action. I'm going to bring that one in. And I click add new item, and I have to choose the type of value. So what type will the value have? The keys are always text typed, but what value do I want? There is no option for location, but I can choose text, and I can rely on the fact that text and location can convert between each other very nicely. So I'll choose text, and I'm going to say that my home location is Buckingham Palace. Obviously it isn't. Now that hasn't worked. That's an annoyance. I do this every time. Delete that. Make sure I've highlighted the text field and now choose Buckingham Palace. How many times I've done this and I still get it wrong. Notice because we can't store the location object in there as a location, it's asking us to store latitude, longitude, whatever we want. But this case, full street address, that's fine. Do the same thing for work, and I'm going to say obviously that I work at St. Paul's Cathedral. This is a very interesting life I'm now leading. Click done again, and if we press play, you'll start to see what this looks like. It's nowhere near as nice as the way lists are handled. I have, this is JSON, if you're familiar with programming. It's kind of a weird data structure based on JavaScript, but you can see that the home key, the colon says that key home maps to that address, and then the key work maps to that address. Not particularly friendly, but we can then use this for something very interesting. So if I press, if I pull in the show in maps option again and pass in the dictionary, let's see what happens. There's no smart user interface. It just picks one at random. And actually what it's doing is passing in the entire text, and it's just seeing that Buckingham Palace is in there. That's not particularly nice at all. But if we go back, what I can do is click on this, and rather than say pass in the dictionary, I just want to pass in the values. Okay, click done. And now if I press play, I get a pop-up similar to what I did before. So this is now a list of the values, and I'm just going to choose, say, St. Paul's Cathedral. Same thing, we've seen this already. What about if I wanted to pick an exact value from here? And next week, we'll see how to do this by prompting the user to select one of these keys from a menu. But for now, I just want to hard code a value. So I'm going to click on values, choose get dictionary, and then get value for key. I will set that one to home and click done. And now I get this nice little home marker here to say show home in maps. It's going to pull this location, which is linked to the home key in here. And there we go. We've gone back to Buckingham Palace. So obviously this is not particularly useful on its own like that, but when you're maybe presenting some kind of menu for these keys and allowing people to choose from them, that's quite useful. And I do have a shortcut for part 4 that uses that. So a thorough understanding of data types, the actions that you can perform on those data types, the properties of those data types is absolutely critical to mastering and really understanding what you can do with shortcuts. And not just shortcuts, but really any programming language kind of works this way. You'll be better at coding in any language if you understand what actions, what functions you can do, and what kinds of data you can operate on. I'm particularly excited for part 4, where we're going to stitch all this together and we're going to build some very useful shortcuts, adding in some scripting actions, adding in some user interface, and really starting to get a feel for how this system can go end to end to solve a user problem. I hope that you found this video useful and I hope that you found it entertaining. If so, please hit like, please hit subscribe, and don't just hit subscribe, but hit the bell as well so you don't miss out on any future videos, including part 4. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.